Before we start, I need you to imagine something. Imagine waking up one morning and the person sleeping next to you for 10 years is just gone. No note, no explanation, no trace. Now imagine discovering that everything you thought you knew about that person was a carefully constructed lie. This is my story, and I'm sharing it because maybe, just maybe, it will help someone else who's living in the same nightmare I was. But I have to warn you, what I discovered about my husband will shake you to your core. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that matter. And please stay until the end, because the confrontation I'm about to share will leave you speechless. March 15th started like any other Tuesday in our suburban home. I remember the exact date because it's burned into my memory like a brand. I woke up at 6:47 a.m., 7 minutes before my alarm, like always. But when I reached across our king-sized bed, expecting to feel the familiar warmth of David's body, my hand met cold, empty sheets. The bathroom door was open. His side of the walk-in closet looked untouched. His coffee mug, the blue ceramic one I bought him for our 5th anniversary, sat clean and unused in the cabinet. "David?" I called out, my voice echoing through our 2-story house. The silence that answered back felt different somehow, heavier, more final. I told myself he'd left early for work. David was a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, and he often had early meetings. But as I padded downstairs in my bare feet, I noticed his laptop bag was still hanging on the hook by the garage door. His keys were on the kitchen counter. His wallet was on the nightstand. The only thing missing was David himself. I called his office. "Oh, he's not scheduled to be in today," his assistant, Margaret, told me in her cheerful voice. "He said he had client meetings in Springfield all week." Springfield, 3 hours away, but his car was in our driveway. That's when the first cold finger of panic traced down my spine. By day 3, I'd called everyone. His brother in Seattle, his college roommate, his golf buddies, our neighbors. I'd driven to every hospital within a 50-mile radius, my hands shaking as I described him to intake nurses. 6'2", brown hair with gray at the temples, hazel eyes, small scar above his left eyebrow from when he fell off his bike as a kid. Nothing. It was like David had simply evaporated. Detective Sarah Martinez became my lifeline during those first weeks. She was patient, thorough, and kind, qualities I desperately needed as my world crumbled around me. "Mrs. Thompson," she said during one of our meetings, her dark eyes filled with professional compassion, "I need you to think, had David been acting differently lately? Any changes in his routine? New friends? Working late more often?" I racked my brain, replaying the last few months of our marriage like a detective myself. Had there been signs, red flags I'd missed while living in my bubble of contentment? He'd been traveling more for work, I admitted, twisting my wedding ring around my finger, a nervous habit I'd developed since he disappeared. But that wasn't unusual. His territory had expanded, and he was excited about the promotion opportunities. What I didn't tell Detective Martinez, what I couldn't bring myself to say out loud, was how relieved I'd sometimes felt when David traveled. Our marriage had settled into a comfortable routine, but comfortable had gradually become distant. We were like 2 actors playing the roles of husband and wife, hitting our marks but forgetting the passion that had brought us together. The detective ran David's credit cards, checked his bank accounts, and interviewed his coworkers. Security cameras at the mall, the grocery store, the gas station, everywhere David might have gone, were reviewed. His phone records were subpoenaed. And still, nothing. David Thompson had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed at all. 18 days after David disappeared, I was cleaning out his home office, partly to keep busy, partly because Detective Martinez had suggested I look for anything that might provide a clue. The room smelled like his cologne and the leather chair where he'd spend hours on work calls. I'd been through his desk drawers a dozen times, but that morning, something made me look closer. The bottom drawer seemed shallower than it should be. When I pulled it out completely, my fingers found a small latch hidden underneath. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pressed it. A false bottom popped up, revealing a space I never knew existed. Inside was a silver laptop I'd never seen before, and a cell phone that definitely wasn't the iPhone he carried every day. This was an older model, a basic smartphone with a cracked screen protector. With trembling hands, I opened the laptop. It was password protected, but David had always been predictable with passwords. I tried our anniversary date, his mother's maiden name, our dog's name from college. Nothing worked. Then I remembered something. Years ago, David had mentioned his first car, a 1987 Camaro he'd bought with money from his summer job. He loved that car, talked about it like it was his first love. I typed, Camaro 87. The screen unlocked. What I found there destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man I'd shared a bed with for 10 years. The desktop was organized with folders labeled Springfield, Work, S, and Family, S. My hands shook so violently I could barely control the mouse as I clicked on Family, S. Hundreds of photos filled the screen. David was at a barbecue, his arm around a blonde woman I'd never seen. David is pushing a little girl on a swing set. David was teaching a boy who looked about 8 how to throw a baseball. David is kissing the blonde woman under Christmas lights. In every single photo, David looked happier than I'd seen him in years. The metadata on the photos showed dates going back 5 years. 5 years of a secret life I knew nothing about. I grabbed the hidden phone with shaking hands and powered it on. The lock screen wallpaper was a family photo. David, the blonde woman, and 2 children, the girl from the swing set and the boy with the baseball glove. They were all wearing matching Christmas sweaters and smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. Like they were a real family. The phone was full of text messages between David and my love, the blonde woman. The most recent messages were from the day before he disappeared. Can't wait to see you and the kids tomorrow. Flight lands at 2 p.m. We'll be waiting at the airport. Emma made you a welcome home card. Tell Emma Daddy loves her. Love you too, Sarah. Sarah? Even her name was burned into my brain now. I scrolled through months of messages. Good morning, beautiful. The kids miss you. Can't wait to be home. Love you more than words. The same sweet messages he used to send me back when we were newlyweds and couldn't bear to be apart. But these messages were recent, some from just weeks ago. David hadn't just disappeared. He'd gone home, to his other home, to his other wife, to his other life. I didn't sleep for 3 days after finding that laptop. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think about anything except those photos, those messages, that other family that David loved enough to disappear for. Detective Martinez was as shocked as I was when I brought her the evidence. In 15 years of police work, she said, staring at the photos on the laptop screen, I've never seen anything quite like this. The level of deception, the organization required to maintain 2 completely separate lives. It's almost impressive if it weren't so devastating. Together, we began unraveling David's double life like investigators solving the crime of the century. Because that's what it felt like. A crime against my heart, my trust, my entire sense of reality. The woman's name was Sarah Mitchell. She lived in Springfield, Illinois, the same city where David claimed to have all those business meetings. Through public records, we discovered that David had been renting a house there under his middle name, James. To Sarah and her children, he was James Thompson, a divorced sales executive who traveled frequently for work. The timeline was staggering. David had met Sarah 5 years ago at a medical conference in Chicago. She was a nurse at Springfield General Hospital. They'd started an affair, but when Sarah got pregnant with what she thought was David's child, a little girl named Emma, David had made a choice that still takes my breath away. Instead of leaving me, he'd created an entirely separate identity. He'd convinced Sarah that he was divorced, that his ex-wife lived in California with their children, and that he was fighting for custody. He'd used his real job and real travel schedule to justify his absences, telling Sarah he had to travel back to California regularly for court dates and to see his kids. Meanwhile, he told me that his territory had expanded and he needed to travel more for work. For 5 years, David had been living 2 complete lives. He had 2 wives who loved him, 2 homes where he was welcomed, 2 sets of responsibilities and relationships. He'd been present for Emma's first steps, her first words, her first day of kindergarten. He'd been there when Sarah's son from her previous relationship, Tyler, had broken his arm falling off his bike. He'd missed none of it. While I'd been home alone, wondering why my husband seemed so distant, he'd been building a second family that apparently meant more to him than the first. The financial records told their own story. David had been supporting both households, paying rent on the Springfield house, buying groceries for 2 families, and Christmas presents for children I didn't know existed. He'd opened credit cards I knew nothing about, had a separate bank account funded by cash advances, and side consulting work. The man was living like a character in a spy novel, except the only person he was deceiving was me and Sarah and those innocent children who called him Daddy. Detective Martinez offered to come with me to Springfield, but I needed to do this alone. I needed to look David in the eye and ask him how he could do this to me, to us, to those children who thought he was their devoted father. The drive to Springfield felt like the longest 3 hours of my life. I'd rehearsed what I would say 1,000 times, but as I pulled into the driveway of 847 Maple Street, David's other home, my mind went completely blank. It was a beautiful house, bigger than ours, with a wraparound porch and a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree in the front yard. There were children's bikes on the lawn, a soccer ball by the front steps, and flower boxes under the windows that someone, probably Sarah, had planted with care. It looked like a home where a family lived and loved and built memories together. David's car, a blue Honda I'd never seen before, was parked in the driveway next to a red SUV that must have belonged to Sarah. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Through the front window, I could see warm light spilling from the living room and shadows moving around inside. A family having dinner, probably. A normal Tuesday evening in their normal, happy life. Finally, I forced myself to get out of the car and walk to the front door. Each step felt like I was walking through quicksand. I rang the doorbell. Footsteps approached from inside, and then the door opened to reveal the blonde woman from the photos, Sarah. She was even prettier in person, petite, with kind blue eyes and laugh lines that suggested she smiled often. She was wearing a flour-dusted apron over jeans and a sweater, and she looked exactly like the type of woman who would bake cookies from scratch and remember to pack love notes in her children's lunchboxes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice warm and welcoming. "I'm looking for David Thompson," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm his wife." The color drained from Sarah's face so quickly that I thought she might faint. Her hand flew to her throat, and she took a step backward. That's not possible," she whispered. "James is divorced. He's been divorced for years. We're getting married next month." Before I could respond, I heard David's voice from somewhere inside the house. "Sarah, who's at the door?" And then he appeared behind her, and our eyes met for the first time in 26 days. I will never forget the look on David's face in that moment. It wasn't surprise or guilt or even fear. It was resignation, like he'd been waiting for this moment for 5 years, knowing it would eventually come. "Hello, David," I said quietly. Sarah turned to look at him, confusion and growing horror written across her features. "James, who is this woman? What is she talking about?" David closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. "Sarah," he said softly, "this is Rebecca. She's my wife, my other wife." The sound Sarah made was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Part gasp, part sob, part scream. She stumbled backward, and David reached out to steady her, but she jerked away from his touch like he'd burned her. "Mommy," a little voice called from inside the house. "Is everything okay?" Emma appeared in the hallway behind them, a beautiful little girl with David's hazel eyes and Sarah's blonde hair. She was holding a crayon and had what looked like homework spread out on the kitchen table behind her. "Daddy," she squealed when she saw David, running toward him with the pure, uncomplicated joy that only children possess. David scooped her up automatically, and I watched my husband, kiss the forehead of a child I'd never known existed. A child who loved him completely and trusted him absolutely. A child whose world was about to be shattered just like mine had been. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. We sat in David's other living room, Sarah and I on opposite ends of the couch, David in the armchair where he probably watched TV with his other family every night, Emma coloring at the kitchen table just out of earshot. Sarah couldn't stop crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but silent tears that streamed down her face as David explained how he'd been living a double life for 5 years, how he'd lied to both of us about everything. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I met Sarah, Rebecca, our marriage we were struggling. You know we were. We barely talked anymore. We were like roommates, not husband and wife. I wanted to scream at him that marriages go through rough patches, that you work through them, that you don't solve your problems by creating an entirely separate life. But I was too shocked to speak. When Sarah got pregnant," David continued, "I panicked. I should have told you then, should have asked for a divorce, should have been honest, but I couldn't bear the thought of losing either of you. So I created James. I told Sarah I was divorced and told her my ex-wife lived across the country. I thought I could manage both lives, make both of you happy." "Make us happy?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice raw with pain. "You made me fall in love with a lie, David. James doesn't exist. The man I've been planning to marry, the father of my children, he's not real." That's when I learned the most devastating detail of all. Tyler, Sarah's 8-year-old son, wasn't from a previous relationship. He was David's biological child, too. David had been in Tyler's life since birth, had been there for his first steps, his first day of school, every birthday and Christmas for 8 years. While I'd been struggling with infertility, going through painful treatments and procedures, grieving the children we couldn't have, David had been raising 2 children in another city, children he'd never mentioned to me, children who called him daddy and drew him Father's Day cards and saved their allowance to buy him birthday presents. "The kids," Sarah whispered, looking toward the kitchen where Emma was still coloring, oblivious to the fact that her world was imploding. "Oh God, the kids. How do I explain this to them? Tyler thinks you're his father. Emma has never known life without you. They're planning to be in our wedding next month." David buried his face in his hands. I know I've destroyed everything. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not the children." "But you did hurt us," I said, finding my voice at last. "You hurt all of us. You stole 5 years of my life, David. 5 years where I could have found someone who actually wanted to be married to me. 5 years where I blamed myself for our problems, wondered what was wrong with me, that my husband seemed so distant and distracted." The house felt like a museum of the life I'd never known David was living. Family photos covered every surface. David teaching Tyler to ride a bike, David and Sarah at Emma's preschool graduation, David carving pumpkins with both children last Halloween. There were handmade crafts with "I love you, Daddy" written in crayon, a Father's Day mug that said "World's Best Dad," and a family calendar on the refrigerator with David's work travel schedule carefully marked so Sarah would know when James would be home. It was a real home, filled with real love and real memories, and it made our house, our marriage, feel like the fake one. I left Springfield that night without speaking to David again. There was nothing left to say. Sarah and I exchanged phone numbers. two women bound together by the wreckage of one man's deception, and promised to stay in touch as we figured out how to move forward. The legal proceedings were complicated. David had committed bigamy, though he'd never legally married Sarah. He'd committed fraud, using false identities and maintaining separate financial accounts. But mostly, he'd committed the kind of emotional devastation that no court could adequately address. I filed for divorce immediately. Sarah ended their engagement and demanded that David tell the children the truth about who he really was. The conversation with Tyler and Emma was apparently heartbreaking. Tyler, old enough to understand betrayal, was angry and confused. Emma, only 5, couldn't comprehend why Daddy suddenly had a different name and why Mommy cried all the time. David moved out of both houses and into a small apartment across town from Sarah. He was trying to maintain a relationship with Tyler and Emma, but Sarah was understandably reluctant to let the man who'd lied about his entire identity continue to be a major part of her children's lives. The financial entangling was a nightmare. David had been supporting 2 households on one salary, supplemented by credit card debt and loans I knew nothing about. Our house went into foreclosure. Sarah's house, which David had been paying for, was in jeopardy too. But the hardest part wasn't the money or the legal complications. It was rebuilding my sense of reality. For 10 years, I'd believed I was married to a man who loved me, even if that love had grown comfortable and routine. Now I had to accept that for half of our marriage, David's heart had been somewhere else entirely, with someone else entirely. I started therapy, trying to understand how I'd missed the signs, how I'd been so blind to what was happening in my own marriage. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, my therapist, helped me realize that David had been a master manipulator, skilled at compartmentalizing his life in ways that most people couldn't imagine. "You're not naive for trusting your husband," she told me during one of our sessions. "Trust is the foundation of marriage. David violated that trust in the most profound way possible, but that's a reflection of his character, not yours." Sarah and I did stay in touch, bonding over our shared experience of loving and being deceived by the same man. She was struggling too, not just with the betrayal, but with the practical reality of being a single mother to 2 children who were grieving the loss of the only father figure they'd ever known. "I keep thinking about all the times he said he had to travel for work," Sarah told me during one of our phone calls. "All the weekends he couldn't be here because of custody issues with his ex-wife. I actually felt sorry for him, thought he was this devoted father fighting to see his children. I never imagined those children were real, and that one of them was you." 6 months after that devastating night in Springfield, I was living in a small apartment across town, starting over at 34 years old. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was honest in a way my marriage never had been. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Thursday in October. David didn't contest anything. I think guilt was eating him alive, and he wanted to make the legal process as painless as possible. Not that anything about this situation could ever be truly painless. I'd started a new job at a nonprofit organization that helped women rebuild their lives after domestic violence and emotional abuse. It wasn't exactly my situation, but the work felt meaningful in a way my old marketing job never had. Helping other women find their strength reminded me that I had strength too. Sarah and I met for coffee once a month. It sounds strange, 2 women who'd been married to the same man, maintaining a friendship, but we understood each other in a way no one else could. We'd both loved David, both been deceived by him, and both had to rebuild our lives from the ashes of his lies. "Tyler's been asking about his father again," Sarah told me during one of our coffee dates. "He wants to know why David lied, why he had another family. How do you explain something like that to an 8-year-old? I didn't have an answer. How do you explain to a child that the man they trusted completely was living a lie? How do you help them understand that love and deception can exist in the same person? David had been trying to maintain a relationship with Tyler and Emma, but it was complicated. Sarah was protective of her children, understandably wary of letting someone who'd proven himself capable of such elaborate deception back into their lives. The kids were confused and hurt, struggling to understand why their daddy had suddenly become a different person with a different name and a complicated past. As for me, I was learning to live alone for the first time in over a decade. Some days were harder than others. I'd catch myself setting 2 coffee cups in the morning or buying David's favorite cereal out of habit. I'd see couples holding hands at the grocery store and feel a stab of longing for what I'd thought I had. But other days, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. No more wondering why David seemed distracted during dinner. No more feeling like I was competing with something for his attention, not knowing that something was actually someone, an entire other family. My therapist helped me understand that grief after betrayal is different from grief after death. When someone dies, you mourn who they were. When someone betrays you this profoundly, you mourn who you thought they were, and you have to accept that person never really existed. The David who'd held my hand during my father's funeral, who'd surprised me with flowers on random Tuesdays, who'd talked about growing old together, that David was real in those moments. But he was also the David who was planning a future with Sarah, who was tucking Tyler and Emma into bed, who was living an entirely separate life that had nothing to do with me. Both versions of David existed simultaneously, and somehow I had to find a way to make peace with that impossible reality. Just when I thought I'd heard the worst of David's deception, Sarah called me with news that made my blood run cold. "Rebecca," she said, her voice shaking, "I need to tell you something. I've been going through some of David's old papers, things he left behind when he moved out. I found something." She'd discovered a third phone hidden in a box in their basement, an older phone with text messages and photos that revealed yet another layer to David's web of lies. There had been a third woman, Jennifer, a flight attendant based in Denver. David had been seeing her for 2 years, telling her he was a widower whose wife had died in a car accident. He'd been flying to Denver once a month, supposedly for work, but actually to spend long weekends with Jennifer. Unlike Sarah and me, Jennifer didn't have children with David, but the relationship was serious. She'd been pressuring him to move to Denver, to start fresh together. The text messages Sarah found showed David making excuses, telling Jennifer he needed more time to settle his late wife's estate and figure out custody arrangements for his children. Even his lies had lies. "How many of us were there?" Sarah asked me, her voice hollow. "How many women did he convince to love him while he was lying about everything?" I didn't have an answer. The David I'd thought I knew was capable of maintaining 2 separate lives, which had seemed impossible enough. But 3? How does someone manage 3 different identities, 3 different relationships, 3 different sets of lies? Jennifer, it turned out, had been trying to reach David since he disappeared. She'd been worried sick, thinking something had happened to the man she loved. Sarah found her contact information and, after much deliberation, decided to call her. That conversation, Sarah told me, was one of the most difficult things she'd ever done. Jennifer was devastated, not just by the betrayal, but by the realization that the man she'd been planning a future with had never existed at all. She kept saying she should have known, Sarah told me. She said there were signs, how he never wanted to video chat, how he was always vague about his work schedule, how he never invited her to visit him. But she trusted him, just like we did. 3 women, 3 separate lives, 3 hearts broken by one man's inability to choose a single truth to live by. A year after David's disappearance, he reached out to me. Not through a lawyer or a mutual friend, but directly. A simple text message that said, "Rebecca, I know I have no right to ask, but could we talk? I need to explain." I stared at that message for hours, my finger hovering over the delete button. What could he possibly say that would explain away a decade of deception? What words could make sense of the pain he'd caused, not just to me, but to Sarah, to Jennifer, to 2 innocent children who'd loved him unconditionally? But I realized I needed to hear it, not for him, but for me. I needed to look him in the eye and ask the questions that had been haunting me for a year. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown that neither of us had ever been to together. David looked older, thinner, like the weight of his lies had finally caught up with him. His hair was grayer, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly as I sat down across from him. "Don't thank me," I replied. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for me." He nodded, accepting that. "I know you have questions." "Just one, really," I said. "Why? Why not just divorce me if you were unhappy? Why create this elaborate web of lies that hurt so many people?" David was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup like it might hold the answers he was looking for. "I was a coward," he said finally. "I was unhappy in our marriage, but I was also comfortable. I loved you, Rebecca, but I wasn't in love with you anymore. And instead of having the difficult conversation, instead of being honest about what I was feeling, I took the easy way out. I created a fantasy where I could have everything, the security of our marriage and the excitement of something new." "But it wasn't just something new," I said. "You built entire relationships. You had children. You made promises to multiple women. That's not taking the easy way out. That's living multiple lies simultaneously." "I know," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Once I started lying, it became easier to keep lying than to tell the truth. Each lie required another lie to support it. Sarah got pregnant, and instead of confessing everything, I created a story about being divorced. Jennifer wanted more commitment, so I invented the dead wife story. Every time I had a chance to come clean, I chose deception instead." "And the children?" I asked. "How do you justify what you've done to Tyler and Emma?" That's when David finally broke down. Tears streamed down his face as he talked about the kids, about how much he loved them, about how he'd never meant for them to get hurt. "They were the best part of my life," he whispered. "Being their father was the only thing I did right in this whole mess. But I've destroyed that too. Tyler won't even talk to me anymore. Emma asks Sarah why Daddy changed his name, why he can't live with them anymore. I've traumatized the two people I love most in the world." That conversation with David was the last time I saw him. I heard through Sarah that he'd moved away from Springfield, couldn't bear to stay in the same town as the children he'd hurt. Jennifer had moved on, started dating someone new, someone who existed under only one name and lived only one life. Sarah and I still meet for coffee sometimes. She's doing well, focusing on her kids and her career. Tyler's in therapy, working through his feelings about the man he'd called Dad for 8 years. Emma's resilient, in the way children often are, but Sarah watches her carefully for signs of lasting damage. As for me, I'm rebuilding, not just my life, but my ability to trust, to love, to believe that not everyone is living a lie. It's been hard work, but I'm getting there. I'm sharing this story because I want other women, other people, to know that if something feels off in your relationship, trust that instinct. I ignored so many small signs because I wanted to believe in the life we'd built together. David's frequent travel, his distraction, his separate phone that he said was just for work. Individually, these things seemed normal. Together, they were a pattern I should have questioned. But mostly, I want you to know that you can survive betrayal, even betrayal this profound. You can rebuild your life from nothing and find the strength you didn't know you had. You can learn to trust again, to love again, to believe in the possibility of honest relationships. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living a lie. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Share your own experiences in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our pain is the first step toward healing. And remember, you deserve a love that doesn't require lies to sustain it. You deserve someone who chooses you, fully and completely, every single day. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of my healing journey.